Hi, my name's Adam Schneider. I'm a sound designer for music and video games, and in this two-part video, we'll be going over some general techniques for analog kick synthesis on the DSI Tempest. We'll be creating 8 kick sounds in total, 4 in this first video and 4 more in the next one. Here's what they sound like. Let's get started. The first thing that we'll be making is a 909 style kick built off a triangle oscillator. To begin, let's initialize pad 1. Next, go to your oscillator section. My initialized sound has a sawtooth wave loaded into oscillator 1 and nothing else. So for this kick, make oscillator 1 a triangle wave. And tune it down to G-sharp 0. Turn your oscillator 1-2 mix all the way to the left to make it as loud as possible. Using your right cursor button, on the last page we see Wave Reset. Turn this on. What this does is every time a note is played, the oscillator will restart from a 0 crossing. This gives us a little bit more of a consistent sound. Next, let's go to our amp envelope section. By default, I have my amount set to 127, which is where I like to keep it when designing sounds. Let's try turning the decay down to 62. We want some sustain at the start of the sound to emphasize the low end, so let's use the peak. And try setting it to an amount of 38. To hear what the peak is really doing, you can try turning it up drastically. For now, let's keep it at 38. I want to change the shape of the decay envelope, so to do this, let's go into the mod matrix. Here we can bend the shape of the amp envelope by assigning amp envelope to amp envelope decay. Let's try doing an amount of -5. It's subtle, but let's try increasing it more. What we're actually doing is bending the envelope from being linear to something that has more sustain up front and a quicker fade at the end. In this case, a small amount of -5 is what I'm looking for. To really make this triangle wave sound like a kick, we need to go to our pitch envelope. Let's start by setting the decay to 39. We'll then increase the amount to affect the pitch. Right now an amount of 70 sounds good. Let's try playing with the peak now. If we use very short peak times, it can affect the transient of the sound. Here's what too much peak sounds like. If we keep it subtle at 1 or 2, it gives us a tiny little bit of snap or click at the start. Now that our pitch is starting to sound like a kick drum, I want to take out some of those upper harmonics. So for this, we'll be using the low pass filter. Let's keep it in 4-pull mode and bring it down to 53. Now it's too dark at the onset of my sound, so for this, let's go to the low pass envelope section. I want the kick to start out bright and then get darker over time, so let's do a decay of 70. And let's increase the amount to 90. We now have our first kick sound. Now that we have our 909 style triangle wave oscillator kick, let's make a variation of it that sounds a little bit more aggressive. To start, copy pad 1 onto pad 2 by holding down the copy button and selecting pad 1 and then pad 2. Next, let's go back to our oscillator section. If we change oscillator 1 from a triangle to a pulse wave at 50%, we instantly get more harmonics and it becomes a saturated, industrial sounding kind of kick. But what if I wanted to change the pitch envelope and make it quicker? I'm not quite getting what I want, which is a quicker, snappier decay, so what I really want to do is change the envelope shape. To To do this, let's go back into the mod matrix and assign the pitch envelope to the pitch envelope decay. This is similar to what we did for the amp envelope, but instead of a negative amount, we're going to be using positive amounts to give it a quicker, snappier kind of decay. You can hear the envelope getting shorter and shorter. Again, let's compare at a value of 0 and a value of 25. What this has actually also done is shorten the length of our pitch envelope, so we want to go back to our pitch envelope section and try increasing the decay amount slightly. In this case, I want to add about 56. We now have our second kick drum sound. So let's try making a kick drum now that uses both of our analog oscillators together. Let's start by copying pad 2 onto pad 3, our square wave kick. Go to your oscillator section. Let's try changing oscillator 1 back into a triangle wave. Now let's turn on oscillator 2. We'll set it to a pulse wave at 50% and tune it to the same pitch as oscillator 1, which is G-sharp 0. It's important to turn wave reset on so that way oscillator 1 and oscillator 2 are in phase with each other. We can now blend the two sounds. However, you'll notice that the sound is actually quieter when mixed in the middle. Because of the way the mix knob works, we actually get the loudest, most present kicks when the knob is hard panned to either side. Because of this, one technique I like to do is use an envelope to blend one oscillator into the next. Let's leave our oscillator 1-2 mix hard pan to the left and go to our aux1 envelope. Use the right cursor button to go to the destination page and change it to oscillator 1-2 mix. This envelope can now be used to fade between the two oscillators, so if we go back to our envelope settings, let's turn the amount up to 127 and start increasing the decay, so we're fading from a square wave into a triangle wave. By tweaking the decay, we could start to get some really interesting sounds. Now let's try a peak of 19 so it holds on the square wave for a little bit. And then use a decay of 24 to fade into the triangle wave. So now let's try something a little different where we use the same waveform. So let's go back to our oscillator section and turn oscillator 2 into a triangle wave. We're not really hearing a difference because both oscillator 1 and 2 are set to a triangle wave at the same frequency. But now let's try going to our pitch envelope section. Go to the destination page and change the destination from all oscillators to only oscillator 2. So with only oscillator 2 being bent, we're getting a low end from oscillator 1. That's a little bit different. Oscillator 2 is now acting as our transient and oscillator 1 is our sustain. So if we go back to our pitch envelope settings, let's try making it shorter. A decay of 43 is good. Now let's turn the amount up to 100. We now have a punchy kick using both oscillators. To compare, let's set the pitch envelope destination back to all oscillators. It's a good sound, but it's different. If we change it back to oscillator 2, we get a more sustained low end. We now have our third kick drum sound. For our fourth kick drum, we'll be creating a variation on our first 909 style kick that uses multiple envelopes to shape our pitch. This is a very powerful technique for controlling and shaping our sound. First, let's copy pad 1 onto pad 4. Let's start by going into the oscillator section and tuning our pitch down to F-sharp 0. Next, let's go to our filter section and switch it into 2-pole mode. It gives us a slightly brighter sound. Now let's close our filter all the way down to a value of 1 to darken it. Now let's go to our low-pass envelope section. I want the kick to start out as bright as possible and then get darker, so let's turn the amount up to 127. Now let's go to our pitch envelope section. Let's shorten the decay down to 22 so we get a thumpier kick. Now we're going to use our aux envelopes to control the pitch and tweak our sound even further. Let's start by selecting the aux1 envelope and then going to the destination page. Since we're only using one oscillator, you can set it to oscillator 1 frequency. Next, go to aux2 and give it the same settings. Now both of our aux envelopes are controlling the pitch in addition to the pitch envelope. Let's go back to the aux1 envelope. Our pitch envelope had a decay of 22, so for this envelope, let's use a longer decay of 30. Now let's increase the amount. At 30, we get a thumpier sound. Now let's go to our aux2 envelope. If we use a very small decay of 2 and then start increasing the amount, we get a nice clicky transient that we can control. It's a bit much at the higher values, so let's bring it back to 0 and try increasing it again. Right at 25 is feeling good to me. If we compare it to our original 909 kick drum on pad 1, we've changed it into a punchier, deeper sound that still only uses a single triangle oscillator. In the second part of this tutorial, we'll be creating 4 more analog kick drums using different techniques like self-oscillating filters, feedback, and more. Thanks for watching.